Welcome to Bass Talk with Hagen and Hayes. Today's topic is, well, we have a very special guest, one of my former teachers, the fantastic Bronwyn Nash.
Bronwyn, thank you for being here with us today. We're really honored to have you with
Well,
us.
please, the honour is all mine. I'm really a dinosaur. I come from a different age altogether from you people nowadays.
Well,
But
it's
it was
just
all very different, and maybe it was of interest.
definitely of interest. Tell us, what was it like starting out? You were one of the pioneer female double bass players in the world. How hard was it? How many people discouraged you? How much gumption of your own did it take?
Um, a hell of a lot, but the reason that I did it was that I was so knocked out by the capabilities of the bass in the hands of Gary Carr that, and I was absolutely determined. My view was, if one person can do this, it's possible for somebody else to do it. And so I did succeed in going, and I actually went to. I had 5 children, by the way, before I started to play the bass. Although I had
Wow.
been a cellist initially,
Mhm.
um, and had gone to college, Royal Manchester College of Music. I'd gone on the cello. Didn't had a terrible one of those awful incidents with a teacher who tried it on with me. And of course, in those days, they didn't believe you, and so I sort of got demoted from being the top level of class, as it were, in the
Right.
college to being pushed to the also rans. And so, but of course, I didn't realise that at the time. It's only nowadays, looking back, and you know of it happening now and what how it is. But anyway, but then after I'd had these children, I was married to the viola player, the principal viola in the Northern Symphony Orchestra, and the reason I landed up playing the bass was that there was this extraordinary woman in Newcastle on Tyne, which is in northeast England, um, where this young new orchestra had set up in Northern Symphonia, which is happily still going. She was a remarkable musician, a wonderful cellist, and had been in Paris during the 20s and 30s and been taught by Feuermann. And anyway, she ran a an evening class of an orchestra, small orchestra, and she said to me, "I've got a bass which nobody plays. If you would like to play it, and you can borrow it and have it and learn it, as long as you come and play in my orchestra every week." And that's actually how I started.
Wow.
And it was just, I'd actually always loved looking at basses, and I'd loved the sound when I was in playing orchestrally and all of that. And anyway, it was. I won't go into it, but it was absolutely marvelous to sort of learn. And I basically sort of kind of taught myself as best I could from what I already knew, which is a good thing because I didn't start with all the, oh no, you don't do this on the bass. Oh no, we don't do that on the bass. This is how we do it on the bass. It was, I'm trying to make a sound here. I know roughly how to do it. I'm going to do it the best I can. But also there was only one bass in the Northern Symphony Orchestra. It was a chamber orchestra, and he was very keen on sort of alternative things. And he gave me a few pointers and well, sort of lessons. And he used all 4 fingers. You see, that was the crucial thing. What he called it guitar because he'd started from a sort of jazz side and become a classical musician from having been a youngster, doing all the pop groups and playing a bit of jazz and sort of climbing up that way, and then got into college and became a classical player. So I was lucky really in that because he was willing to, and he could see the point of sort of being more agile in your playing with your left hand. Anyway, but then the interesting thing is that I started playing the bass, and within 6 months of playing the bass in this little orchestra, and then of course as soon as you did one thing, people asked you to do another. And bassists were not sick on the ground around Newcastle on Tyne, irrespective of whether they were male or female. So I got asked to do all sorts of things with the most horrendously awful groups of players, I can't sort of amateur players. You're looking back, but for me, incredibly useful because I was sort of exposed and having to do things on my own and work things out, which I did. And then uh, within 6 months of actually sort of starting all of that, I was actually asked to go and play second bass in the Symphonia. And I remember the program that first time was Dumbarton Oaks and Le Bourgeois Gentilhomme, neither of which are particularly straightforward for the bass. But my husband said, you've got to learn every note. And he virtually sort of stood over me while I practiced so that I knew absolutely everything inside out. So I didn't embarrass him, basically. So basically, I sort of found myself there. As a consequence of that, because by this time I'd been released by the miniskirt and the tights and everything, and I got contact lenses instead of glasses because I'd been embarrassed by having to wear glasses all my life. And the press took note of the fact that I was playing with a Symphonia. And some guy rang up and said he'd like to do a piece about me playing with the Symphonia because they knew I had 5 children, how I was combining the two together. And so he came round and he took these photos and then wrote, and it turned out to be a whole page piece. It was absolutely enormous in the main evening paper in Newcastle. And it sort of gave me a fright because I thought, God, people are actually noticing me. I can't just be in the background bumbling around. I've got to do this properly because people are going to notice otherwise. But then the crucial thing was the all-time sort of memorable moment, which directed me into the course that I then took, was when in those days, there was no Radio 3, there was no classical music per se on the radio. But what there was a thing called a third program, which did arts, and they had music on that. And they had a late night sort of recital thing. And my husband came dashing into the kitchen and said, you've got to come and listen to this. You've got to come and listen to this. So I rushed off, and it was actually Gary Carr playing La Sonnambula. And he said, this is a double bass. And I heard it, I listened to it, and I just thought, how in heaven's name do you do that? It was like, it was like a sort of thunderclap or lightning flash or whatever. And then coincidentally, well, I suppose he was making a visit to and he was very young, had short hair, short back and sides, very, very clean cut guy with a tie and collar, not a bit like what we expect of later on with Gary with his, afro haircut and everything. But the BBC also did, I think it was on something like a Wednesday night, last thing on the television, black and white television, they had a recital. It was a couple of small pieces. I remember seeing the first time I ever saw Jacqueline Dupre was actually on that when she was being accompanied by her mother, both in these great, glorious crinoline gowns. Looking like that. I mean, but she sort of burst upon the scene like that. Anyway, he was on it and he played. I look back on it and I've always thought he played it unaccompanied, but maybe there wasn't accompanied. It's oh God, what's the name of it? Dum da dum da 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 dum da da da. What's it called?
Barcarolle, Offenbach.
Barcarolle, yes, Barcarolle. And he did it all sort of double stops and stuff. And it was totally remarkable. And the moment of actually seeing somebody doing that, as well as hearing what they were doing, was, I've got to find out about this. And as it happened at the time, the Symphonia Orchestra had a Canadian conductor, young Canadian called Boris Brott. I don't know whether or not either of you ever heard of him, but he was full of muscle and go, and he did great publicity work for the Symphonia, got it sort of recognized because it was going around. We didn't realize it was virtually skint at the end of every week. It had no Arts Council support at all, and local sort of landed gentry people kept sort of shoveling the odd couple of thousand towards it just to keep it going. And some very notable people who did keep it going. But he was there and he did a lot of publicity in terms of raising the profile and some television. We had 4 television programs with Tyne Tees Television. And I was actually in that orchestra because it had to be slightly bigger than normal. So it was quite fun as well. And it made me realize how important it is to be seen. And that was a crucial thing in the whole thing. But anyway, then Gary Carr came over and played some solos with the orchestra as a consequence of Boris Brock getting him over. And I actually managed to ask him, you know, if I could get myself over to Canada, would you teach me some lessons? And he said, God, I will. I expect he didn't think I ever would get there, but I did. I did get there. And I spent 6 weeks there practicing his exercises religiously in Halifax in a little sort of bed and breakfast place. And with a group of other his students. It was my first exposure to the sort of everybody playing exercises all together, and how useful that is in terms of awareness of what other people are doing, being able to criticize and compare yourself with what other people are doing, and this whole sort of adjustment thing within a group, which I think is so important in terms of learning any instrument, really, actually, because, you know, we can all do it brilliantly in our back room, can't we? But so that's really where you know, how it all started. And then when I got back, I'm afraid I did sort of, by this time I realized it looked quite good and it was a bit unusual, and I did a bit of trading on that. But that has its downside, because at that time women weren't not doing anything. I mean, have either of you ever seen a film called Made in Dagenham?
No.
You haven't? Well, I suggest you watch it, because it's all about it's about a group of women who worked for Ford cars in Dagenham. There's a big factory making Ford cars, and they sewed all the seats, the seat covers. They were incredibly skilled, and they were refused the proper skilled rate of pay. It wasn't considered to be as important as what the men were doing, and yet anyway, they went on strike. And as a consequence of that, they actually brought the whole of Ford to a standstill across the world, because, would you believe it, they were making the seats for all the Ford cars across the world. It was the only place that Ford had. And they brought it to its knees. And as a consequence of all of the upturn of that, the then Labour government brought in equal pay for women. But it was an extraordinary time, because up until then, everybody, if you were a woman, you didn't get whatever you, even if you were doing exactly the same job as a man on a line, you were getting 70% of what he was getting. Yeah. And so it was difficult to convince people that you were any good. And I got a lot of criticism that, oh, people just book her because she looks good and she's good at talking. Because that was the other thing I did. I didn't try and play music that had been specifically written for the bass, because most of it's nobody's ever heard of it. So I did arrangements all the time, which is what I did at the time, because if they could hear Greensleeves arranged by Vaughan Williams on a double bass and piano, it was somehow more convincing than playing something by somebody that nobody had ever heard of. Sure. Because they knew what it was supposed to sound like, and they could make the comparison. So it did work, but there's still a place for it, but things have changed now. This is why I say I'm a dinosaur.
More like a trailblazer.
Well, maybe I was, except nobody wanted to trail in my blaze, as it were, because
I think people just had a delayed reaction. You know, it took a while. It sounds to me like you were very brave, and whether you knew at the time or not what an influence you were having on people, you just said, I want to do this, I'm going to do it. And that takes a lot of gumption, and you have to be very brave and strong to do that.
Yes, but I'll tell you what else I had, was that I had to earn money. I mean, this was the crucial thing, because by this time, some time along, my marriage had broken up and I was on my own with 5 children to support. Mm-hmm. And it was interesting that, I was doing a couple of days teaching locally, mostly bass, but a bit of cello, because that's how I started. And I've always felt that I should always be putting back something into the system that gave me the start that I had. And it was interesting that if I did I don't know what the figures were, but say I was getting £350 for a recital, I would get £350 for a 3-minute television slot on an afternoon chat program.
Ah.
And my goodness, they weren't only useful monetarily, but they were very, very useful in terms of publicity, because people got to know. And then the other thing in this country in those days, there were music clubs and little festivals. There still are, but a tiny number by comparison with what there were then. But of course, there was no internet or anything, and you had to do everything by post. So the one thing that my children were quite useful for, I put them in line and they would stuff the envelopes and stick the stamps on and stick the labels on. And the last one would lick the envelopes and close them.
Perfect.
And that was quite useful. But I would be habitually sending out, 300 to 400 of those annually in order to get the work. But I got the work. And I just carried on. But to get back to your thing, the driving thing that I always had in those days was to get people hearing the bass and the bass on its own and what it could actually do, as Gary used to call it, the bel canto, the singing bass. Mm-hmm. Because people used to come up to me and say, I never realised that instrument could actually make that beautiful sound. It's like you always said it's like a cello. Well, it is mostly like a cello. The register is hardly, it just goes a bit lower, and it doesn't go quite as high. But normally it's never seen. So one of my things was to develop concerts for children, and I actually consider that was my greatest contribution to it all. I don't know how many children ended up playing the double bass, but I think it must have. I actually played to thousands and thousands and thousands of children, because I devised a way of making a program. It was actually a musical story, which I sold as being suitable for the whole of a primary school. And I concentrated, incidentally, on the very young children. I didn't bother so much. If they wanted me to go to a secondary school, then I did something slightly different. But and I had this character, Bartholomew, the beautiful bass, who did these various things. And that was the one that I think, as I say, and in a curious way, I think I enjoyed those more than anything. They didn't pay terribly well, and we would do sort of 4 in a day, rushing from one school to another in an area. And I think it was quite a good sort of contribution to what children were hearing at the time. So
you talked about going to study with Gary. It sounds so easy, doesn't it now? I'm just going to Canada to study with somebody. And it must have been completely different when you went. And what were the challenges you had of getting from here to there?
Oh, well, the main challenge was getting them to accept that the bass came I bought a ticket for the bass, so it came in the cabin with me. And the main challenge was when you got to the desk and you wanted to, and so the only way it would accept me was Mr. Instrument Nash. That's what it had to have that. When it came as a double bass, it was no good. But I'll tell you an interesting thing. On one of those occasions, I arrived with my bass, to go through the desk and everything. And there was somebody else with a grandfather clock who was doing the same. I'm sure that's the only time there's been a grandfather clock and a double bass on the same plane.
Couldn't make that up, though, could you? You really couldn't.
No, you couldn't, could you? And I have to say, it wasn't one of those really huge double thing. It was what they call a grandmother clock. So it was about the same height as a person.
So what did you want from Gary because you'd heard him play, you'd heard him live, and what did you want from him?
What did I want?
What did you want?
I wanted to find the secret of the singing sound, which I found. I'd already started standing up, because I'd noticed him. This was the thing when I saw him playing the barcarolle. He was standing up, and I thought that was totally unusual. Nobody ever stood up in those days. In fact, one of the Halle people I know actually fell asleep sitting on his stool and actually fell off and fell down the tiers, you know. Luckily during a rehearsal, not during the show. But so I was already doing that, and I was already aware of the different feel under your left. You know, the whole of your left arm is different when you're standing up. Yeah. You're no longer pressing the strings down. The bass is pushing against you, which means that the activity in this arm is different from when you're just back here as a cellist using your fingers. You don't have anything like the strength and muscle in your hand and fingers that you do in the weight of your arm. You're using weight instead of muscle, and it makes it more relaxed, and you're able to do more with the left hand. At least that's what I found. But I didn't know about the no rosin business and playing nearer the bridge and slowing the speed of the bow. That was absolutely revolutionary, and it was absolutely not accepted by so many bass players back here at the time. This was throw your rosin away. The bass players had music stands festooned with all kinds of gadgets that they might need in the course of whatever it was they were doing, including various types of rosin. I kid you not, there was a sort of very heavy, sticky rosin you put on if you're going to do a lot of grumbling around on the bottom strings, but something a bit lighter for if you were doing a lot of, sort of on the top two strings. And I mean, so it was all about using stuff to do things instead of actually doing it yourself. So the throwing the I think I didn't put any rosin on at all in those 6 weeks I was there in Halifax. I think because I just wore out all the rosin that was already on it. But then the other thing was that Gary's whole sort of open approach about everything. There was nothing that he ever held back. It was all give, give, give. And the fact that it was this group, I think there were about 5 or 6 of us that were sort of in and around the environs who got together every day for, I don't know, I can't remember how long, but to do all the exercises together. And there was this whole sort of feeling of bonhomie, you know, and we're all in this together, and this is exciting. The only embarrassing moment when we were playing something and I needed to, I got a pencil mark that was wrong, and I said, has anybody got a rubber? Well, it's all right for you and me, David, but you don't say that over in the States or in Canada.
No.
Especially not for a lady.
No. I'm sure it was slightly scandalous or humorous.
Well, there was a sort of stunned silence. That was the thing. Sort of, you know, I think there was one other girl, Elizabeth Peterson, who was actually, she played in Halifax Orchestra, and she was a great Gary fan, and she used to come to some of those sessions, and so, but the rest of them were all blokes of all kinds of different kinds. I know I can't remember where they all came from, but from different places. But there's just sort of, why is she asking this? You know, I don't know what went through their minds, but there we are.
Now, you were talking about teaching, and I agree. I feel it's important to share what we have figured out about this beautiful beast that we love and pass that to the next generation. I have students that are older than I am. I have students that are very young, you know, but I think it's an important thing to do. And I know you taught a lot, but you also taught the young David Hayes. What was that like?
Oh, it was great. It was great because he was very solemn and very determined. And in a quiet kind of way, he was not going to be deflected. And that's a quality that I admire so much in everybody, because none of us has an easy time. You know, we think people have an easy time, but nobody does. Everybody's fighting and struggling. And he basically, I saw a little bit the same thing. He was inspired and he wanted to do the best that he possibly could. And so he used to, he might have told you, he used to come to my house together with one other or possibly 2 others for a weekend. And bear in mind, I have 5 children. So somehow we No, I think, no, my eldest told me she was never there. She'd gone to university by then. And it was only in term time that this happened. But anyway, and I used to set them going in the music room, which was above the kitchen, doing the exercises. And if I heard something that needed, because I was having to cook and do all the usual things as well, I would shout at them, and they could hear me through the floor. Do you remember that, David?
I do very well. We used to be terrified.
Well,
So we
I
used
didn't
to be
think you were
terrified.
terrified at all. I thought you'd give as good as you got.
It was Andrew Durbin and I. It used to be two of us used to come,
Yeah,
and I travel on a Friday. You'd meet me at Bangor Station, and then we'd stay until Monday morning. Then you took me back to Bangor Station, and yeah,
yeah.
I think you'd had four children at home, plus
Did
the
I?
two ones. Yeah, so it
Yeah.
was quite a full house, wasn't it?
It was, yes, but they were the children were used to it. I mean, the children's house was a full house just with them, so they were kind of used to it. But they also, yes, it was. But I used to do cooking in advance. That was one of my great savings things. I had a huge chest freezer, and I would fill that up with meals ready because that's how I did it when I was traveling. And sometimes I would be away up, so a week or 10 days I'd be away, and the children would be going to school, and everything was labelled in the freezer. So they got it out in the morning and put it on the top of the Aga when they went to school, and then it was unfrozen, and then they just put it in the oven so that they. Honestly, it wouldn't be allowed nowadays. I'm sure social services would be around complaining and everything. But as you know, my parents were just up the track. It wasn't as if they were completely alone. They would have been more alone if they'd been in a city, I think, actually.
Yeah.
And so my mother was popping in and checking that everything was all right, and they knew where to go if there was any sort of problem. And I think it made them self-sufficient. I hope it did anyway.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
But I have to say that all David is a sort of kind of star. There are other stars. Everybody's a star in their own way. But David, by creating this quite extraordinary career for himself, yes, which isn't just playing the bass, but contributing this vast amount of material for teachers and players, yes, of all different kinds in all different situations. It's an output which is quite extraordinary and useful to the point of how ever did we manage without it.
Right.
I think I was lucky though in my teachers, because you were commissioning music and you were playing all this solo repertoire, and I saw you doing it, and I think I've never taken no for an answer. I think maybe just when I was younger, it was maybe less obvious. But I mentioned to a friend that I used to be, I'm so enthusiastic. And he said, well, you were exactly the same when you were 18. You haven't changed. You've just got
that's true. Yeah.
And wow, well, I thought I got worse. He says, no, you were just as bad then. So I'm quite surprised by that. But I've always been inspired by other people. And that's the nice thing, is you and I have kept in touch since the late 1970s, which is nice. But I saw you doing it, and you didn't take no for an answer, and I liked that.
Well, I sometimes had to take no for an answer, but I would go somewhere else and ask the same question until I got to that.
That's exactly how I've done it. And Susan said, we've talked about this many times, and your mama said, Susan, if you're not invited to the party, have your own party. Yeah. And this is it's such a great way of looking at things. Mm-hmm. And I've always done that. As a bass player, you're always on the margins of things, and you're never part of the string family, really. Doesn't matter how much they say. We're on our own. So I've just used that to my own benefit, really.
Mm. Yeah, but I was what I would say about you when I knew you when you were young was that you were a lot quieter than you are now.
Was I?
You say you were terrified of, maybe I did terrified you into silence, but you didn't contribute a great deal back. But I could see that you were working a whole lot of stuff out in your head all the time. That was whirring away like mad, but you didn't actually say much back to me that I recall.
I think there were lots more with bigger personalities and more to say. And I'm not sure when I was younger, I had the confidence to say it. I may have thought it, but I probably wouldn't have said it. Now I would say it, without thinking. No, I
Yeah.
don't care.
No, you don't care. No, exactly. Yes, yes.
But I think you grow into the person. I think you're there from the start. But
Mm,
I think with life, I think gradually you develop into the person that you really are.
I
Um,
think
yeah,
absolutely
and
true.
I quite like me. Until age 50, I didn't like me, and then once I hit 50, well, I'm not going to live to 100. I may as well start liking me. And yeah, I'm okay actually. I'm doing the best I can, and
Yeah,
I
I
think you
think
feel
that
much happier then.
that is always the thing, that if you're
Mhm.
doing the best that you can and you don't
Mhm.
stop, I
Yeah,
think that's the
exactly.
best recipe.
Mm.
Yeah.
But to get back to this business about the no thing, what I did find, and what I mean, I was driven out of the performing by this physical thing which happened to me, where I had damaged my hip, and then arthritis got into it and made me lamer and lamer. I mean, some of those last 3 years of playing were performing were absolute physical agony. But it was only when I had to stop, when I would find myself playing, and then the leg would actually an excruciating pain, and it would collapse. And then if
Oh,
I wasn't absolutely on the ball to take everything onto my left leg, I would have fallen over. And I thought to myself, this is getting too hairy. And that's when I actually had to stop actually performing. But one of the really depressing things about all of that was the refusal of the sort of musical field in this country to actually accept. You talked about being on the margins. I was absolutely kept on the margins. And the only way that I got out of the margins was by going down this populist route, mainly through little things on the telly. And I that wasn't right. There should have been some recognition for what I was doing. And there were personalities involved who were on the other side, who were absolutely convinced that the traditional way of playing the bass and the traditional things you did, in other words, in a symphony orchestra, as a gang of 10 or whatever, that was the only way. There was no alternative, and they weren't going to in fact, they were going to actually stand in your way and put in a bad word for you, because I did get messages back about how bad words had been put in, such as, well, don't expect very much for her. She looks good, but it's awful.
oh,
And that kind of thing. It's very difficult to get past that. And it wore me out, on top of the physical wearing out.
yeah.
In many ways, I wish I had stuck at it and gone back in, but you can't turn the clock back. I was approaching 60 at that point. And, I'd been uh, appointed as an associated board examiner. So I
Oh,
was able to kind of keep the wolf from the door by doing that. They did overlap for a while, but then, as I say, the whole physical thing was just too much to manage.
sure.
However, I'm where I am. And
Well,
I
I
did
think
end up, maybe you don't know this, Susan, but I'm actually a very good musical saw player. Did you know that?
no kidding.
Yes, I
Oh, I
am.
have I have a friend from here that's a viola player that plays the musical saw. Do you have it nearby?
No, I don't, because I'm not at home.
Okay.
But it's on. You can hear all these things on the website that I've got.
Yes. Yes.
But that came about because one of the things that I did in performance was I developed this program called Slap and Tickle, which is slap the bass, tickle the ivories, in
Mm.
conjunction with a very, very fine pianist called Maurice Horhat. And he was a classical pianist, but who was also a very, very good popular piano player, and in fact made a huge study of it, and also a jazz player. And we just concocted these they were crossover programs, which now are very popular. But in
Yeah.
those days, nobody did them. And in those days, nobody talked to an audience. Did you know that? You came on and you played and you
Yeah.
went off. And you came on and you played and you went off. But we came on and we chatted to people and we played and we chatted to them again. And then we went off and then we came back and chatted a bit more and played.
That's
So
very
it was actually
groundbreaking. That was very
that
groundbreaking.
it was, yes. But you
Yeah.
see, this trouble kept breaking these grounds all the time. But nobody wanted to know. This is not how we do it. We don't do it like this. There's a way that you do things. But anyway, but so that and we had an opening, and this is how you can turn something which is bad to your advantage. Because I was having trouble carrying the bass with my hip getting worse and worse, I had been having the bass on the stage already, and I just walk up to pick it up and go on from there. But then I thought, well, what isn't there some way that we can make something out of coming on with the bass? So, do you know that song, The Stripper?
Yes.
Well, anyway, Morris played that, and I would wheel the bass on a wheel, and I would actually strip it with all the gestures as if it was a striptease. Have you ever seen a striptease artist in the flesh? You probably haven't.
No.
But in my youth, in going to Manchester, the old vaudeville was still up and running in the theatres.
Sure.
Lots of theatres around, and I did see a few of these ladies doing it. They were absolutely remarkable. I mean, there's a lot of them well past the age where they should be doing it, but the feeling and the artistry and it was so evocative. I mean, it was just incredible the way they did that. So I sort of incorporated that into opening the bass, and of course it got the thing off to a nice light-hearted touch sort of way. And I was sort of saying to people, look here, I'm not going to play a whole lot of solemn music on the double bass here. We're going to have fun. You're allowed to laugh. Right. And that was, I think I did quite a lot of good with that.
Sure. I was just yesterday talking to my students at Berklee College of Music, and I was saying when I was in graduate school, I was giving my recitals that, are required. And I said, my teacher would say, you do not speak to the audience. You don't even acknowledge them. You bow, but you don't make eye contact with anyone. You pick a spot on the wall in the back of the concert hall and you look at that. And you don't look at the people, they don't exist. And I said, I like to talk to my audience. I like to tell them about the music or about the instrument. I said, but back in college, it was not allowed. And just like you said, this is not how we do it, and it just wasn't allowed. And I think that my students today, they were shocked because they're so used to more of a sort of give and take from the artist on stage with the audience.
It's a case of embracing. You embrace your audience and you bring them to you and you communicate. And I have to say, actually, Susan, that the thing that it was absolute agony when I had decided I couldn't go back to playing again.
I bet.
Because the thing I missed most was the communication. This opportunity to go out and actually give something to people and get their feeling back again. It was quite devastating, really. It took me a long, long time to get over that.
Yeah.
However, there we are.
How did you deal with that? Because I think a lot of bass players come to a point where something in their body just sort of wears out, whether it's from playing the bass or just from life. How do you get past or get through that time of I can't play the bass at this point?
Well, for me, I suppose I was lucky that I was doing the examining. And with that, there's a kid coming in every quarter of an hour, a new kid. And you do that communication thing with them. And I have to say, initially, I was pretty hopeless at it, but because I was actually very unhappy at that time. And I was making the best of what I could, but that's what I learned to do. But I've never actually lost that sort of mini grief of not being able to go out and play. I mean, somebody just a year ago asked me if I'd go and she was having an 80th, she's a harpist, was having an 80th birthday concert, celebration. She's done a huge amount for the harp in terms of developing a harp festival and things, which has now been running for about 30 years and done a whole lot like that. And she wanted to do the Danse Sacrée Profonde.
Oh, yes.
which is not a difficult piece, but I had to say no because now I've got this anomaly in my eyes, which makes me see double. And by the time you put on the glasses to do that, you can't actually, you can't look at the conductor and then back at the music quickly enough. And so and anyway, the place where she was going to have it, you have to walk up about 10 very steep steps onto the stage. And then I would have to come down again as well. And so sometimes when you realize reality, you're not just chickening out.
No.
You've had your go, and you've got to try and remember the good things you did. But I'm sure I'm sure you're the same. If you do a recital, all you ever remember is the thing that goes wrong.
Yes.
And you don't remember all the bits that were really, really good. Right. And I think that you have to sort of concentrate on that, on the good things that you've contributed, and know that you've done. I mean, look at David. How he's turned out, and I must have had some sort of influence on him. So, and I anyone who wanted to play the bass as a solo instrument after me would have known that I did it first. So there's an importance in being that, even if it was, you are the prow, the boat cleaving through the waves, and people who come behind.
You influenced me far more than you influenced me far more than you realize. Yeah, just because you did it and you got up there and played Bottesini when very few Brits were playing Bottesini, and you're the one who taught me harmonics, how to play. You made me learn the harmonics from the Dragonetti Concerto. I remember one lesson in the I was staying in the little bedroom off the kitchen. And I'd prop the music on the windowsill, and I was learning to play these harmonics. And I've taught harmonics throughout my teaching career. And I remember doing a thing. It's just as a way of introducing them to younger players. And I've arranged lots of quartets. So bass 4 only plays 3 notes, G, D, and A. So you got a 1 in 3 chance of getting it right. So, and even if you get it wrong, it'll still sound nice.
Exactly.
It fits in with harmonics. And somebody once said, one of my pupils, I was walking past, he was talking to his parents, and he said, Mr. Hayes is mad on harmonics. And that's come from you. And I think one of the best things I sell is, I wrote a book called Harmonious Harmonics, which is just trios and quartets for harmonics. Just a really easy way of playing them and taking the stress out of it. Because, exactly. With bass players, you don't play harmonics until you get to a certain level. And I just like the idea that even youngsters can play. So now when I write a piece, I'll put harmonics in 4th position, just the first finger D, first finger A. Because everybody can play them. It's such a nice way of introducing. So you inspired me for that. I'm sure you didn't realize at the time. But also the fact that you were doing it. And that's, and you were doing it despite I think the sort of hostility from lots of other bass players, and I've encountered exactly the same. But as you get older, you don't care. You care even less, because as I say, you're doing your best, and you inspired me from that. So, as I say, you probably didn't realize it, but you really were one of the key figures in my development as a bass player and musician.
Well, hopefully it was good. Well, it sounds as if it was quite good, so I'm glad about that. I'll tell you about what I felt about the harmonics, and starting with harmonics. And I have to tell you, I do this with cellists as well, which they never normally do. It's so easy to get the sound, and it's always in tune. It's so brilliant, and you never have a problem with the sound quality, because you can move the bow too fast and it still works on a harmonic. And the other thing about it was that the bass is a big instrument, so you're going to move. The cello is quite a big instrument, so you're going to move. So if there are these places where you can go, where there's a note and you don't have to press it down, you just put your finger on it and you play it. It gives you this positional awareness right from the very, very start.
I was in Spain. I was working, teaching and playing in Spain, and there was a bass player from Mexico. And he said,
Mm.
I use your harmonic book all the time, which unless someone tells you, you have no idea. And he
Yeah.
said, a lot of the basses are really bad quality, bad strings, but when you play harmonics, it sounds really nice. So all these kids can suddenly make the bass sing, even though it's easy harmonics. And I was, wow. And I thought, wow, I'm so pleased to hear this because no one ever tells you they play your music, or it's only occasionally you hear about it. So that was so nice to hear that it's being played and used, and it works, which is good.
Yes, it does work. It does work. The only thing is the bass has got to be in tune. The basses have got to be roughly in tune with each other.
That's another
True.
issue.
But we know the other thing about the bass is about the sounding of the bass is that if it sounds even halfway decent, people are impressed. I'm not saying that it doesn't say completely decent, play completely decent, but even if it's just much, much better than they thought it was going to be, you've made an impression. It's
And
part
I
and
think the
parcel.
bar is often very low of what people expect.
Exactly, it is. So you
Yeah.
can actually startle people. And because once people have been pleasantly surprised, they sort of sit up and take notice, and then you've actually got them. And then the interesting thing, I think, is that what has happened since Gary Carr sort of burst on the scene, and because let's face it, David, I wouldn't have done what I did without his inspiration and without his knowledge and without his giving of that.
Right.
The what has happened is that the expectation has forced the development of generally a much better bass sound. I was listening to that's right. Just recently, I was listening. There's a series of they're re-showing on the BBC television some interviews of opera singers way back in the 70s, including Joan Sutherland, Kiri Te Kanawa, Cavallo Montserrat, people like that talking, and then there's bits of them, and I'm listening to the orchestras, and I'm hearing the quality of the bass in those orchestras all that time ago. And I tell you, I am not wrong when I say that the level of the quality and the standard of bass playing in normal orchestral sections is almost chalk and cheese from what it used to be. There is an expectation now that the bass line actually has a center to the note instead of just rumble. And that's a huge achievement because it's actually dragged the bass, back into more of the whole proper expectation of accuracy in the
Yes.
string section.
Yeah, it's true. It's really true.
So, how many people do you teach, Susan?
Um, so it's interesting at Berkeley. I have a couple of classes. One of my favorite classes is electric bass players who want to learn the double bass. So it's
Oh
interesting
yeah,
because they're kind of beginners, except there's
mm.
a lot of information that crosses over.
Yeah,
Um, and that class usually has 6 players in it, which is great. It's enough so everyone can get some individual attention,
yeah,
but they're playing together. Like you both were talking about, it's really
yeah,
important for them to hear
yeah.
other basses.
Mm.
And then I have a couple of other classes of sort of um, better bow technique classes and an orchestral repertoire class. And I
Mm.
also have an ensemble that's like right now it's a trio. Next semester it's going to be a sextet. It's just
Oh, how
growing.
lovely.
The kids are so
Yes.
excited. I'm so excited. And then I have 12, I think it is, private students at Berkeley. And then I have another 12 private students at my home. So it's sometimes almost more teaching than in a week I feel I can handle with my performance schedule, but it's
Yes.
good. It's a good blessing,
Yeah.
it's a
Well,
good problem to have.
it is. I was just going to say, don't knock it. Don't look for anything easier because there's a
Right.
limited time that you can do that. If anybody can do it.
Yeah.
So
This
you
is how
hang
I
on to
feel.
that
Yeah.
and
And
see what life brings you. But
right? And you never know what next year will be. And so
no,
I
you do.
I just feel really fortunate to have all of that, and
Yeah.
I get to perform as well right now, and I enjoy that for as long as that lasts too, because I've always had this sort of thought process of you don't know what tomorrow will bring, so enjoy what you have
Yeah, that's
today.
right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes.
Yeah. I have one last question, and David, I'm sure you have questions. I'm sorry I'm asking so many, but what what is one of your favorite transcriptions that you've performed or that you've created?
Oh, I've always loved Thais meditation.
I love that piece.
It is. I think it's such a sensational piece, and I played it. A lot of my transcriptions that I, when I first started, were things that Gary had all played, but I don't think he ever did the Greensleeves, the Vaughan Williams Greensleeves, because I used to do that a lot. You
That's
know, the one,
nice.
the Fantasia, with the
Yes.
little, the lovely little clog dance in the middle,
Hmm.
folky clog dance. But the Thais meditation, because if you know the story behind that, it's almost more heartrending when it's played in the lower register than when it's normally violin. But the
Right.
violin is very, very high for the kind of agony that bloke is going through when he
Yes.
realizes that,
Yeah.
his monk has fallen headline and sinker
Hmm. Hmm.
for this courtesan with all the urges that brings and going against everything that he thinks he's done. I mean, and anyway, I always used to love, and that's just off the top of the head. When we stop this, I think, oh, why didn't I say so and so? But that that is one. Whenever I hear it, I always stop and listen and think about it.
Yeah, it's a
Well,
beautiful
the
one.
other piece you did play a lot was the Deer Hunter, the theme from the Deer Hunter.
Well, yes, I know, but that's very short.
Yeah, but the Massenet's is amazing. I've played it and taught it many times. I played it in France, and I was doing it with a singer there, and he was astounded the bass could do anything, which was beyond half position. He couldn't
Yeah,
believe it. He's absolutely amazed. I was doing that. It's an operatic program, so I was doing that and Sonambula, I think, in the same program. And they're astounded you can do anything. You said I think the 1970s that people were astounded the bass could sound nice. And even in 2023, again, Susan and I have talked about this many times, we're still evangelizing. Even now, people come up to us or to our students and say, I didn't know the bass could sound so nice. And that's in 2023.
Yep.
yes.
Absolutely.
So it's going to be a long time, I think, before audiences really understand what the bass can do.
Well, I think it'll be never actually because the opportunities are limited.
Mm.
You
That's
know,
that's one of the problems I think because I've been fortunate enough in the past couple years to play concertos with orchestras, but not nearly as many as violinists and pianists do.
mm.
And I thought, geez, every time most of the audience comes up to the dressing room at the end, and it's always this, I didn't know the bass could sound like this. And I'm thinking, if you heard more of it, you'd all understand. But how frequently is an orchestra going to program a double bass concerto? So
Not
we,
very is the
and it'll
answer.
take, yeah, it'll
You know,
take
I
a
was
long
talking to
time.
somebody who ran an orchestra, and they said we haven't had a bass concerto for about 20 years. It's about time we had one. And
Hmm.
I thought, yeah, there you are. That says exactly the problems we have once every 20 years.
Yeah,
Yes, yes,
whether
yes.
they like it or not.
Yeah, that's never stopped me. Yeah, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it. And
Yeah,
that's the nice thing about 21st centuries. You can do it. It's
Yeah,
times have changed a little bit.
yep,
yeah, yeah.
definitely. Well, this is just amazing. I feel like we could talk for 5 more hours, Bronwyn, and maybe we'll get to have you back either on the podcast or just for a visit with David and myself too.
Well, that would
It's
be good. That would be
that would
nice.
be it would be so wonderful, and I have to say thank you because
Oh,
women
next
like
time I'll
you.
have the saw at hand and I'll play you a
Oh, I
little
think
bit.
that sounds great. And and without someone like you, I would not have had a chance to be a bass player. And I always think I wish I could do more for the girls behind me, but I think we each just chip away a little bit
We do,
and
yeah,
and it
and
just
we
keeps
just keep
going.
on doing it, and
Yeah.
we need to play for us to our strengths. We
Yes.
need what strengths we have. We're much more chatty and communicative than the blokes usually, and
Right.
we need
No
to
offense,
use that.
David.
And we need to look nice,
Right.
and
Right.
which we do. We all look nice. We
Yeah.
never go out on a stage without looking nice.
No. No, I'd be embarrassed. I mean, I may not look as nice as I want, but I sure try. And,
That's right. Yeah,
you know,
we we know how to make the best of ourselves.
Yeah.
And we do
Yeah.
that on all fronts. And the very fact that we do it is in many
Yes.
ways enough,
Yes.
you know. So, I mean, in terms of the playing, the very fact that we
Right.
play the way that we play,
Right.
and we play differently from men,
We do.
because if you hear women violinists, you can often tell, or you
Yeah.
suspect this. You know, if you
Right.
come into a broadcast on radio,
Yes.
you don't know. Just I can, for instance, I can always recognise Joshua Bell.
Me too. And Gil
Very,
Shaham.
yes, exactly. Could never be a woman. And
Right.
Janine Janssens, you can
Right.
recognise her. She's
Yes.
always clearly a woman.
Oh, yes. Most definitely. Yes. It's true. It's really true. But, you know, I think in this instruments world, we have to keep encouraging the women behind us, and
We do.
it's working. It's happening. It's slow,
Yes,
but it's
it
happening.
is. Yes, it is slow. It is
Yeah.
slow, but it's
Change
slow in
always
everything.
is.
Yes,
Yeah.
it is. It is. And
Yeah.
just keep going.
Yes.
Anyway, thank you. I'm very, very honoured that you asked me to take part in this. I'm very grateful, and I hope that, and it's something I've said, been of use to anyone that happens to listen to it.
Oh, I'm
Been
sure it will
fantastic. Thank
be.
you so much, Bronwyn.
Yes.
And please
And
do come
thank,
back. We'd love to have you a guest
yes.
again. That'll be fantastic.
Yes.
I'll tell you all the same stories over and over again.
But I want to thank everyone for listening to this really special time that we've spent with Bronwyn Nash, and for listening to Bass Talk with Hagen and Hayes. You can like and subscribe to our channel. And at the bottom of this broadcast, we'll put a link to Bronwyn's website so that people can go and check her out and see the incredible woman and bass player that she is. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Take care.